Okay, let's begin. Welcome everyone to Securing Exchange on Premises, as well as Microsoft Secures Exchange Online. My name is Andrew Higginbotham. I'm a Microsoft MVP.
My name is Raji. I'm the Group Program Manager for Office 365 Security.
So, what are we here to do today? Well, think of this session as if you're on premises and plan to remain on premises, what are some things that are currently available to help you secure Exchange, obviously. A lot of this is going to be already documented, so I'll do the best I can to call out where you can go and dive for deeper information if you like. But it's also going to be, how is Microsoft identifying the security risks in the world, and how are they trying to mitigate them? And some of these features, some of these technologies they use, you can maybe bring into the on-premises world, or at least give you an idea of maybe what you should go out and start looking at through a vendor or a third party to try to achieve, because they've invested heavily in securing Office 365. But we'll first go over securing Exchange from the operational, infrastructure, as well as feature-based perspective, and then go in, we'll detail how those risks can be mitigated there. And then we'll go into 365, and me and Raji will do a bit of a dance back and forth between, I'll discuss a bit of on-premises, and then she'll discuss how Microsoft addresses that in 365.
Yeah, I would be talking a lot about how Microsoft and Office 365 handles all these security challenges. We have a couple of cool demos here. I have my colleague Brandon Kaler here, and Stu is going to join. So we are going to do a demo on Secure Score and Threat Finder, and if time permits, we'll do a demo on some cool ways of how you should be conscious about how you can be attacked with sniper attack and ruler attacks. Let's get started. So before we begin this, I really want you guys to take away and take an understanding on how big Office 365 has become and the kind of momentum we are having. Just over the last year, we have grown 56%, and we are now a $19 billion business. But what's more interesting is our monthly active usage. We have over 100 million people logging in month over month, and we have that kind of usage. What's more interesting is this for me, because over a month, we typically get over 400 billion emails are read or analyzed, and we have like 450 billion Azure AAD logins that happen. You may wonder why I'm talking about this, right? Like, why is the scale important? The scale is super important even with security in mind, mainly because I get varied kind of signals from here, right? Like, because of the rich set of signals I get in Office 365 in the cloud, it's very easy for me to spot. I wouldn't say easy, but really helps me to spot the anomaly. The detection and the behavior of an attacker is easy to spot for us because of the signals that we get in the cloud. Okay, off to Andrew.
So let's first dive into securing Exchange from the infrastructure perspective. And as I mentioned, some of this information, I'll try to call out where it is available already. We'll first talk about BitLocker. BitLocker, on the Exchange team blog, and in the notes of this slide if you choose to later download them, there's a great post on BitLocker and Exchange and what it accomplishes. Let's talk about what BitLocker does. It's nothing new in the Exchange world. It's been around in the Windows world for several years now. The idea is you're securing data on the drives, and what you're trying to prevent against is those drives being taken out of your data center. And it aligns with the preferred architecture from encrypting the operating system as well as the database volumes. Just know that there are some challenges if you are going to virtualize Exchange, where you cannot rely purely on the TPM chip, so you're going to rely instead on password or USB keys to decrypt in that scenario. But operationally, some people forget a few things that are involved when you choose to do BitLocker in your environment. In the post, it's a few years old, but it's still relevant in terms of drive size. In the Exchange team blog post, they use 3 terabyte drives. Now, as we all know, we're into much larger drives, 8, even 10. But they gave an example of a 3 terabyte disk taking 8 hours to encrypt the entire disk, and also spiking CPU while it's doing it. So then you have to make an operational decision about when you're going to encrypt those drives. Are you going to have them, let's say you're using auto reseat, are you going to have them in a hot spare, pre-encrypted, or are you going to do that as you need? But also understand some of the Active Directory and group policy prerequisites if you want to implement BitLocker in a more refined manner, things such as network unlock and what have you. But back to talking about what BitLocker prevents against you know, you can kind of joke and say, like, okay, I think if someone's taking hard drives out of my data center, I probably have bigger concerns, like firing our security folks, right? However, it's still recommended. It's still done in the service. But we're going to talk a bit more about what Microsoft views as a more mature means of securing your data, or Raju will discuss that in a few slides. On to TLS and SSL best practices. Now, back around, I think it was around the 2013 time period, some guidance came out around disabling TLS 1.0. And it seemed a lot of security audits, a lot of programs that were scanning environments would detect that it was still enabled. And there were a lot of support cases with Exchange around people trying to disable TLS 1.0 and things breaking. It's important to remember that disabling TLS 1.0 and relying on 1.1 or 1.2, it's more than simply flipping a switch or adding a registry key or something simplistic like that. It also involves the entire ecosystem. You have to have the client operating system be able to support it, the server operating system being able to support it, as well as Exchange being able to support it, right? And Microsoft's guidance, again, this is a great Exchange team blog post you can find in the notes, or just search the site. It talks about TLS and SSL best practices. While they're still working on giving the okay for you to disable it in your Exchange environments, they have provided a lot of great guidance of other things you can do, such as disabling SSL 3.0 or preferring the stronger ciphers and whatnot. But it should be on the near horizon where we'll get full support to disable it in Exchange environments, or the full thumbs up from Microsoft to do so. But also remember, the PCI compliance requirements were updated a couple years back to where they extended the deadline to where you now have until June 2018 to remain compliant. So you can still leave TLS 1.0 enabled for compliance per their guidelines today. But we obviously recommend still following the best practices around the previously mentioned things, disabling 3.0, prioritizing the strong ciphers, and so on. Now, I talked a bit about data at rest. I talked a bit about TLS best practices. I'll let Raji talk a bit about how they achieve some of those things in 365, and also talk a bit more about what they consider strong encryption of your data, where they encrypt it now instead of just solely relying on things like BitLocker.
Thank you. When I think of data protection in Office 365, I think of it in 4 buckets. One is how do we protect it at rest? How do we do it in transit? What is our device story for data protection? And the last thing is the content level protection. It is pretty new. It is available in Exchange and SharePoint. I'm going to talk about in a bit. How do we do encryption at rest? Encryption at rest is done through BitLocker, even in the service. We have over 700,000 machines. They are all protected with BitLocker. Encryption in transit is again same TLS story. All our encryption in transit is protected, whether it is between client to server, server to server, or cross data center communication. They all are protected through TLS. The device encryption is done through MDM, or the Office apps powered by Intune. That's the device protection story for us. The content level protection is little new. What it really means is if an intruder somehow comes into the mailbox, he's able to compromise the local admin and comes inside the box, he won't be able to get to the data. He won't be able to look at the data or export it out because the data is now fully encrypted in the mailbox servers. The keys are not kept there. So this is true with Exchange as well as SharePoint, and this is available to everybody. Everyone's data when it comes to the mailbox server is encrypted today. What is new that's being announced in Ignite this week, if you have not gone to this session and if you are interested in this, I would highly encourage that you should be watching the video of this session. It's called Customer Key. It is part of the E5 SKU or part of the Advanced Compliance SKU, like if you are part of it. What this says is you will be able to get your data encrypted with your own key, the key that you control. you'll be able to get the data encrypted. And in any point of time you want to leave the service, you can revoke that key, and then the data just becomes a bit bucket in Office 365. This is a strong compliance story for you, because in a lot of markets today you have to follow this kind of compliance control to do certain business. So it's a strong compliance control. I call it built into the service mainly because oftentimes it can become very risky, like when you are taking a key and encrypting all your data, what happens if you lose that key, and there could be a data loss. So there is a lot of recovery key object built into this technology. So you'll be controlling two kinds of key, and of course there is also a revocation that's built in. So it's built into the service. It's auditable and verified. I say this because this feature is going to get covered in our SOC audit for this fall, and also the subsequent audit that happens in the spring and other things. You'll be able to see that if you are part of the customer key feature, then we are encrypting with your key and things are maintained and stuff like that. Okay, to Andrew.
Okay. Now, as someone who's come from the support and consulting world, I've kind of had a love-hate with antivirus over the years. I'm sure some of y'all have had your own interesting stories to tell. Antivirus software on Exchange servers, absolutely recommended, but it always comes with a caveat of proper implementation, right? I've seen many issues caused where proper exclusions were not followed, things such as folder, file, and process exclusions for the Exchange Exchange bits, and that is clearly documented in a couple different articles, but Microsoft's main point here is we don't want antivirus adversely affecting Exchange performance and Exchange data integrity, as well as when you're doing things like running cumulative updates and so on. Now, excuse me, one thing people forget is, antivirus software tends to place a filter driver on both the file system stack as well as the TCP/IP stack. So that means there's great importance on properly deploying it and managing it, because if it goes awry, so to speak, you have a potential for impacting data performance, data integrity, as well as network performance and network integrity, right? So the recommendations here, obviously, implement exclusions where you can, but also understand that every time there's an engine update or a definition update, that is technically a change in your environment. I've had some customers come to me and say, well, this antivirus has been running fine for years, nothing's changed. Well, technically there were things that changed. Those updates are a part of that. So the question then becomes, how are you managing and monitoring your antivirus implementation across the Exchange servers? Are you aware of when these changes get pushed down? Are you notified of them so you have a history of when that change occurred? Are you excuse me, are you able to, if needed, maybe temporarily disable that antivirus software? Sometimes if you're working with Microsoft support, they may ask you to temporarily do so. If you cannot, then just understand that the troubleshooting process might take a bit longer. You may have to look even, pull a memory dump or pull much deeper logs and deeper analysis to figure out exactly where the issue is occurring. Whereas sometimes I've found simply updating the program to the latest version will get you up and stable pretty quickly. So just some guidance there, but the key is operationally knowing what's going on with your instances of antivirus. Are they up to date? When did the updates happen? On which machines have they been deployed, and are they compliant? And that's where Raji has some interesting stories to tell about how Microsoft handles this very same topic.
How many of you have heard about the WannaCry and the NotPetya attack that happened in the recent past? It was a mayhem out there, but I'm very glad to say Microsoft, with the scale that we operate Office 365 with 700,000 machines, we were barely affected by that. That's because all those 700,000 machines are patched. We have a scanner that looks for a patch state on each of these machines every day, and we look for like 5,000 vulnerabilities on these machines on a daily basis. We do unauthenticated network scanning and authenticated scanning for other patch states in each of these hosts. We partner with a company called Beyond Trust to do that. So there is an agent of Beyond Trust that runs on each of these boxes, which is really collecting this data and transmitting to a central location where we do the analysis. And what do we do when we really find a server which is out of the recent patch state, right? So we have something called as repair box that kicks in when it sees a machine which is out of patch state, and everything is automated, no humans are involved, and immediately repair box tries to bring the machine to the correct patch state, and if it is unable to do that, then the machine gets decommissioned, and then it's remade and then added back to the network. So because of this full automation that we have not had instances of, there are stragglers of course, but in general we do not have instances of like our machines being out of the recent patch state, and we have been pretty successful there. And so the NotPetya or the ransomware attack that happened was not a big deal for us.
All right, thank you. Okay, so intrusion detection and prevention, and I want to start this conversation talking about firewalls. Microsoft has long had some, interesting requests from customers when it comes to deploying Exchange, starting in the days of Exchange 03, where you could have front-end, back-end servers. The front-end server could be deployed in the DMZ, and then there were these security requirements of how to restrict access between those two. But then going onward, as things improved, where Outlook connectivity moved from the wide range of RPC ports it used with MAPI to the simply Outlook Anywhere, it got a bit more simplistic. However, there's still this request oftentimes from customers to place firewalls between internal Exchange servers, which Microsoft, the support statement around that is, well, you can do it as long as you effectively Swiss cheese the firewall. You're going to need to put an any rule between your internal Exchange servers. So technically it would be unsupported to try to filter ports between internal Exchange servers. I'm not talking about firewalls at the external layer or between clients and servers, but you have to remember, even though we've improved connectivity and simplicity with the ports that Exchange uses, there are still RPC ports being used for some cases. For instance, in a DAG, checking the health state between copies still uses RPC communications to occur, right? So if you were to try to firewall between the two, you would run into some complications there. However, the recommended approach, and what Microsoft does, is to instead implement intrusion detection and prevention. So it makes more sense to say, do I have a good idea of the traffic that is traversing my network? Do I have a means to detect and alert if potentially malicious behavior is occurring in the environment? And in the on-premises world, there's certainly standalone as well as monitored solutions that could potentially address this. I know in certain industries, a colleague of mine works for a company that does just this, monitoring networks for the financial sector and for credit unions as well. So depending on your industry, this may already be a requirement. But it's certainly what Microsoft recommends instead of trying to lock down all communications in an internal Exchange environment with the idea that the more firewalls you add, then it must be more secure. But in reality, it may be more secure, but it most certainly is more complex. So the guidance is still around have a more intelligent means to monitor what's on your network. Excuse me. And then to further illustrate this, and I'll first say this is a slide that uses Exchange 2013 as an example, but simply because there were separate roles there, so it just makes more sense between the CAS and mailbox to show network flow. But if we're having the discussion of where should your firewall be, you still want a firewall at the perimeter. You can still firewall access between the clients and the servers, because with all the great improvements in Exchange 2013, where Outlook connectivity is now HTTPS, that's certainly a much easier task than it used to be in the days of pure MAPI RPC connectivity, which did not handle latency very well and did not handle being firewalled very well. But also, where in this picture could you place some type of network monitoring or network intrusion detection, intrusion prevention, right? Microsoft takes a really interesting strategy with this and spent a lot of time either partnering with vendors or just deciding to develop their own technologies on how they can better be alerted and notified when something is happening in their network that maybe shouldn't be or is at least of interest. Raji?
So we do a lot of prevention, of course, specifically with respect to network isolation, and not just network isolation, also identity isolation and various other things. But our security strategy has always been to assume breach, because however much prevention that we do, we have to operate with the scale that we operate, that we have to assume breach. So how do we do that? In Microsoft, there is a team called Red Team. So they simulate internal as well as external attackers, but then there is a rules of engagement. Obviously, they don't do any harm. They never get to the customer data, but they stop like just one step before that. But find new ways to attack us. They keep my team totally honest, because every time like they will find new ways to attack us. And there is a corresponding blue team to the red team, which actually does the detection work and then also practices incident response when a real incident happens. We quickly realized, like if you remember the momentum slide that I showed, the kind of growth we are experiencing with Office 365, having this red team, dozens of penetration testers scale up to the complete Office 365 was not a very scalable option. So in tune with the principle of automation, we created something called as AttackBot. AttackBot simulates the red team and finds new ways to attack the servers on a daily basis. I mean, we run AttackBot once an hour, and we simulate and attack on various different scenarios and different targets. And this is something directly from our service, from our data center. So you can see this is one of the AttackBot results that came. We run all kinds of attacks, right? Like, I mean, you're trying to run blacklisted processes, and you're trying to exfiltrate data. So continuously AttackBot is attacking the service. And with such sophisticated attack mechanism, obviously the detection also should be sophisticated. It should be sophisticated irrespective of. So our detection is also completely inbuilt. We have an agent called host IDS that runs in each one of those 700,000 boxes that I talked about, and it looks for all interesting events, like if there is a network traffic that's not supposed to happen, or if there is a Windows operating system event that's not supposed to happen, or for that matter, any application data or context data, all this data is picked up from each of these servers, and they are thrown into a central repository. And this is called Vanquish. And Vanquish gets a lot of signals, a lot of signals. If you look at this funnel, the amount of signals that go to the Vanquish is like 4 million signals per second. I mean, that's the kind of volume we get. The interesting detection problem is, how do we make sense out of this much signal, right? So if you remember what I talked about, like because we get 400 billion emails read every day, or 450 billion AAD logins, so we have a lot of intelligence built around, like, you know, what is anomaly and what is a regular behavior. So we are able to quickly bring this funnel down to about like 10,000 signals per hour. But the complex mechanism is, how do you reduce it further? Because you cannot really have a human eye to go look at some anomaly of 10,000 events per hour. So that's where a lot of algorithms, a lot of machine learning and the AI stuff goes in. And eventually we narrow this down to about 100 signals a day, which looks interesting, and we need to look into it. Again, like showing you something from the service directly, this is a detection heat map that I just picked up from last week. What you see, the blues over there are the interesting excuse me, the interesting detection signals that's happening on the server. But one single event on a server is pretty less interesting, because a lot of these things would happen. What is more interesting are the reds that you see. They are the triangulation. What it really means is multiple signals are happening in that server, so there could be an intrusion behavior, and you need to go there and investigate. So this is where we have a lot of automatic incident response built in. So when you see a lot of these reds, the first thing that's going to happen is automatic incident response will kick in, and if that is not able to remediate, and that's when the blue team or the security team eventually gets involved. Let's talk a little bit about how do we do security response in the service, right? So the security incident can happen because we caught something internally, or it can be reported by a program called bug bounty. Bug bounty is the program where we pay the external attackers to attack us and find new bugs. So in either of these processes, a security event may start, and the security event eventually gets detected. And when it gets detected, the DevOps, so Office 365 in servers operates on a DevOps model. Our developers are our operators too. They get involved. For example, if there is a security event that's happening in the calendaring DevOps get involved. And if he determines that it's a security event, immediately the security team, my team, gets engaged. And then we confirm the event. If it is a data center event, the blue team immediately kicks in and they are trying to remediate, and they will do all the things that they are supposed to do to remediate. But if we believe that it is affecting the customers, then we determine who are the affected customers. And we also determine what's the impact on the customer, right? How much are they affected? And we notify the customers, and then we work with the customers on the incident response on their side, like how do they really mitigate this security incident. Going back.
All right, thank you. Let's talk a bit about publishing Exchange externally. Now, there is again, a great ELO post about Greg Taylor back in the time of TMG being end-of-lifed. In the Exchange 2010 timeframe, TMG was probably the most popular means of publishing Exchange externally. It was a great reverse proxy. It had some interesting security features and also served as a basic firewall in a lot of ways. And at the time, when TMG was announced it was end of life, there was a lot of panic about what can we do, what does the future hold, what are my options going forward. Things such as application request routing and Windows application proxy were listed as options, and those are still options today that will work. However, the area or the industry that really stepped into this space is load balancers. Load balancers, I believe the quote Greg Taylor used at the time, this is a few years ago, was that your load balancer is still a bit of a security device and a bit of a firewall in its own right, but just don't tell load balancers that, they'll start charging for it. Here we are 4 years later, and I think they all have some type of security pack feature in there, right? But it provides great value, though. In many ways, if you're already going to be terminating a session with your load balancer, especially if you're doing layer 7 load balancing as well, you have the certificate there, you're looking at the SSL session. So it makes sense to then use that as your means of publishing Exchange. Now, another topic that was very popular around this time was pre-authentication. And TMG allowed you to pre-authenticate. This means the authentication session terminated in the DMZ or outside of the internal network. However, there was a lot of debate about, because at the time there was this gap where there weren't solutions that allowed pre-auth once TMG was end of life. But Microsoft, their stance was, do you really need pre-authentication? Is it providing you a whole lot of value? You can certainly pursue this if your load balancer vendor gives you an option and you have to do it. That's great. But in some cases, for instance with TMG, to really make it feature rich, you had to join it to the domain, which then you have to ask yourself, was it really providing much security in a pre-auth fashion anyways, right? But Exchange Online doesn't feel the need to do it, and there's been a lot of security enhancements with the Exchange product itself. So the guidance still is Microsoft does not feel you need pre-authentication. It is not done in 365 for Exchange Online. However, if you wish to do so, there are certain third-party vendors that can make it happen for you. Now, transitioning into change management. Now, this is less of a particular product or feature to talk about. This is a bit more complex because it's a bit of a human problem, right? I like to say, if you talk about the OSI model, layers 1, physical, layers 7, application, I like to say that the greatest failures in IT are always going to happen at layer 8, right, the human layer. So this is more about operations, what you do as an organization to handle change. But you can still have technology help you, a tool to help manage when change is implemented, a system or a framework to grade how the change worked, how how it was implemented, how we should better it in the future. It's not just the ITIL stuff, which is certainly still valid, but Microsoft has done some interesting work about building tool sets to help enable them to have better change management operations. And Raju will talk a bit about that right now.
So Andrew said, as Andrew said, even for us, change management is a lot about culture and is a lot about people. Tools are important, but it's a big people thing too. So how do we ship secure code? It all begins with the developer. It all begins with how we really hire the developers and how we really train the developers. Developers in Microsoft have to go through a series of training, security and privacy training throughout the year. And for example, our recent standards of business conduct and ethics training talk a lot about data privacy and how our engineers cannot really use the customer data for any of the business gains or any of the products that they are building. They also undergo application security fundamentals training. This we do in collaboration with a company called Code Bashing. So depending on what technology that they work on, so they undergo training with them so that they can detect things like cross-site scripting or SQL injections when they do code reviews. We also do a lot of internal phishing campaigns. This is super important because we believe that 90% of the attacks happen via front door. So it is like getting a developer getting compromised, then his desktop getting owned, and that's how the intruders can easily get into the service. So we run several phishing campaigns throughout the year, and we have mechanism for them to internally report the phishing campaign. This has been so super successful that in this Ignite, we are launching a feature called Threat Finder, which we are going to demo today. And that's going to help you as an admin to run internal phishing campaign in your own company and educate your users so that they don't get phished. And so then, typically what happens, let's say a cool idea was born and somebody is going to go develop a feature or a new product. It all starts with GRC review. What's GRC? GRC is Governance, Risk, and Compliance Committee. And this is comprised of legal, compliance, and security experts. The developer, when he comes up with a feature, or the feature crew, they take the data flow diagrams, the data classifications, and a detailed threat model to this committee. And a complete analysis is done on that design to ensure that there are no security and compliance design vulnerabilities before they start coding. This is a new thing for us. This was not true until like a month ago, but we realized why change management is super important. So from now on, you cannot really check in anything without a code review in Office 365. The code reviews are done using our internal tool called CodeFlow, and this tool has become so popular now that we are releasing it also to the external customer. This was internally written tool. And this is the most interesting part. As I said, change management is a culture, and sometimes you can strengthen that culture in the team by making it count where it hits. So we have engineering score. The engineering score actually tells a developer how best he was in following engineering best practices. Did he get code review done? What is the unit test coverage of the code that he has written? So every developer in our in Office 365 gets an engineering score, and he also gets a view on how is he scoring compared to his peers and compared to the overall Office 365. This is super interesting because the managers care about it, and this is taken seriously during our annual review rewards discussion. So because it really matters, it affects the money, every engineer takes it seriously too, and the best practices are followed. Sign bits. So we ensure that only signed binaries go to our production server, because if it is otherwise, a developer can inject some extra code into one of the binaries or the DLLs and then put that in the production server and cause intrusion. So we have a detection built so that to detect unsigned binaries when it comes to the production server. Despite all the protection that we take, we ensure that our deployment is totally staged. So our deployment goes to a variety of rings, 5 rings. So in the first ring, it affects only the feature team, and only the feature team's test cases are run, and if there is any bugs or any security vulnerabilities, it's only the team that experiences it. Next, it goes to the entire Office 365 team. The third ring is very interesting because the third ring is the MSIT tenant. Considering the number of employees we have, this is a huge tenant. A lot of scale issues are found in this ring. Next, it goes to what we call a SIP, or the first release ring, and the first release customers get to experience it. And only after all these rings are passed, it goes to the worldwide. So we have enough baking, a lot of test cases that are run throughout these rings so that if something got slipped and the change management was not followed, it really doesn't affect the production customers.
So moving on to Exchange security features, the actual means in which you use the product and your users connect. Let's first talk about modern authentication. So modern authentication, it's based on Active Directory Authentication Library and OAuth. And the way I like to explain it is it enables a lot of great stuff. It's moving to more of a security token-based authentication model instead of the more simplistic present a password, the application accepts the password. In Office 365, it's been available since the spring of 2016, but just think about the things you do when you authenticate to 365 and all the different applications that have to talk to each other to make it a more seamless experience. There's no such thing as a cloud credential manager up there managing all your authentication and creds, right? It makes much more sense to use a token-based means of authentication to pass these things around. Now, excuse me. In 365, it is enabled or disabled at the organization level, but also does have some client dependencies. So if you choose to use it in 365, then just understand those dependencies. As for on-premises, Greg Taylor tomorrow at the same time is going to be presenting modern authentication for Exchange Server on-premises. So he'll talk about a few of the different scenarios that it can be used, how to deploy it, its gotchas, you name it. If for whatever reason you can't make the session, I'm sure it'll be uploaded just like these all are. But it'll be a great session. Greg's a great presenter, and this is a very exciting topic for a lot of people on premises. For one big reason, multi-factor authentication is one of the things that modern authentication can now allow. This is a request that's been around for quite some time, and third parties up until now have offered their solutions. But this is going to enable you to use modern authentication along with ADFS and a few other configurations in your environment to try to achieve this. Now, I share a quick story about two-factor authentication. I say it's always important to know the difference between two-factor authentication and the same factor twice. A buddy of mine worked for a company that I won't name, who, this is in Exchange 2010 TMG timeframe. They had issues of people brute force attacking the TMG OA page and locking accounts out because they had pretty simplistic passwords at the time because people had trouble remembering them. And this resulted in this issue. Well, their IT team found out that if they intentionally broke TMG to where it made you authenticate twice, it broke these attackers' scripts or whatever they were using. So literally you went to OA, you'd log in, it would accept it, and it would make you log in again. But the brilliant part of this is apparently in an internal email, the IT department shared it as saying, hey, be aware of our new multi-factor authentication system with Exchange OA. And that's when I told my friend, that's not multi-factor authentication, that's the same factor twice. But it is important to know the different means, what constitutes a factor, what are the different means of achieving multi-factor authentication. And Office 365 has a lot of great options that Raji can talk about now.
So one advice we give to all our customers with respect to security best practices, if you do nothing else, at least do MFA. The multi-factor authentication can really help you from preventing against attacks more so than anything else. We have multiple ways to do this. You can get MFA through mobile apps. That can be push notification, or you can get a one-time password, or you can get a out-of-band phone call to do the MFA, or it can be done through text message. You can get your OTP password on your text. Other than MFA, we have a couple of other cool features. One, this is part of the E5, again, the compliance suite. It's called ATP, Advanced Threat Protection. There are two components of ATP. So ATP protects you against clicking the malicious links and getting phished. So there is an algorithm that runs which determines the email links that you're getting is safe or not. And ATP also ensures that when you're getting a attachment and it is deemed unsafe, then it is opened in what we call as a detonation chamber. So in a sandbox, so that your environment is not affected if it is contained a malware or something. So ATP is part of the E5 suite. And then we also have DLP. DLP protects you so that you can have your configuration set so that your users are not keying in wrong informations that they are not supposed to send out, things like social security number or credit card or something like that. So you can have DLP rules to prevent against such happenings in your industry. Okay.
All right. So rogue administrators, I mentioned before about the greatest failures in IT can happen at layer 8, the human layer. And this is really a big problem for a lot of companies, and there's third parties out there that help mitigate this, limiting who can do what when. It's more than just saying, I have a strong admin password, or maybe I don't use my admin account all the time. This really comes down to knowing what damage can be done simply by an administrator going rogue, so to speak. The most important thing here is to separate your infrastructure admins where possible from the Exchange admins. I often tell people, if you look at RBAC in Exchange, that's really Shell, and that's the Exchange Management Tools, the EAC, right? But if you're a full Active Directory admin, there's nothing preventing you from just opening up ADSI edit or LDP if you choose, and just directly modifying these attributes and these objects. Because Exchange, in the on-premises world, Exchange is still just a bunch of attributes and objects in AD, right? So it's all about guarding the keys to the kingdom and knowing what kind of third-party solutions there are to limit access or to log access. If you can't limit access, at least try to log it. Implement admin audit logging, mailbox audit logging, so at least when using the Exchange management tools, there is a record and a trace of what changes happen. Excuse me. But this is another great Exchange team blog post. Again, it's in the notes, or you can search for it yourself. It's protecting against rogue administrators, and it goes into great detail about the different things you can do in an Exchange environment to prevent from this. So it mentions the logging and monitoring, but also using things like App Locker to prevent improper applications from being run on the Exchange server itself. And then just, again, from the RBAC perspective, you can at least remove unneeded commandlets and unneeded roles from certain individuals. But Microsoft has gone a step further in designing their own framework and their own technology around controlling when changes happen, removing privileges that aren't needed until the exact time that's needed, and putting a framework in place for approving those changes and tracking those changes, which I'll let Raji talk about right now.
So one thing that scares us, and I'm sure it scares you, is Exchange admin today has godlike privileges. He can do anything. There are, of course, detection mechanisms, but by the time it kicks in, the Exchange administrator has already done whatever he really wanted to do, the malicious things. Same is true with the servers too, because we run the servers on Active Directory. So again, a domain controller permission or an admin can do a lot of wrong things. So in the servers, Office 365, I think, is the only service out there which can make the statement that we operate with zero standing admin access. Nobody is an admin. Nobody has any right across all our 4,000 on-call engineers that we have in Office 365. Anytime you really want to do anything, we operate through something called as lockbox. So when a Microsoft, okay, before we go there, before we even go to lockbox, right, we had to do a lot of work over the last 5 years in our service to get to this state. So we had to really break our service, like Andrew said, you have to have a very narrowed RBAC. We had to break our entire service into a very scoped breach boundary so that anything that you can execute, it can be executed as a task. Just so when a person really wants to do something, say reboot a server X, he just goes and says, I need to reboot a server X. He gets permission only to do that and nothing more. And also we ensured that 99% of our service operation can be done with automation and without any human touch. But for the 1% of the operation, when you really the human have to go and do something in the service, all our on-call engineers go through background clearance and they go through extra clearances as needed if they are working in military or any other restricted environments. And we require MFA to do anything in our service. You cannot, without MFA, you can absolutely do nothing. And when you have to do something in our service, you have to go via lockbox and only with the permission. So let me show you how that works. When a Microsoft engineer wants to do something in the service, he submits the request to the lockbox system. And the lockbox first does its first level of due diligence. It may say that, hey, Raji is trying to do something in the service, but Raji is on vacation, she should not be doing things. Then it filters out my request right there. But once it passes the basic lockbox gate, then it's sent to the Microsoft approver. Anytime any task that we are doing that touches customer data cannot be auto-approved. So it goes to a physical person for approval. And only after that person approves, the Microsoft engineer is able to run that task to do the system. So all our execution is with scoped permission to do a task A and nothing more. So it's a least privilege access. The access is given just in time. So when you need to do the job, you come and ask for permission. You do not have the permission by default. This is very important because when an intruder comes and compromises my account, by default he has nothing. He has to compromise my account and my approver's account so that he can really do something in the system, right? And the permission is given for limited duration, and access, the approval you get only after approval from access. And we have a lot of logs, and strict auditing is done on that. And through our FISMA and SOC audit, they go through that. We are able to access the service only after getting approval from Logbox. And even you as an admin can plug into our management activity APIs. In this API, we expose over 150 events, multiple fields and events. So you can go and see not only how Microsoft did the data access, you can also monitor the events so that how your tenant admin or how your users access some of those, the security events that's interesting to you. And because we did a lot of work with breach boundary and we are very confident that we can do the 99% of access without ever touching customer data, we could release a feature called Customer Lockbox. This is again part of the E5 SKU. So we also believe that we never have to touch customer data without getting a call from you, right? Like something that we have to fix for you, you're unable to fix yourself. So we get a customer call, a Microsoft engineer has to run one of the commandlet, which is RBACed into a role that we call as touching customer data. Then it goes to the lockbox system. The Microsoft approver approves after a lot of scrutiny, specifically when it touches customer data or it is an admin elevation. We are very, very strict about it and you don't get easy approvals. Let's say he approves because he knows there is a support ticket associated with that and he understands it. But if you are a customer lockbox customer, then we send the approval to the customer. So there is a role called compliance admin. It can be your tenant admin or anybody else in your company. And only after the compliance admin approves does the Microsoft engineer gets permission to go and execute this commandlet against your tenancy. So customer controls, in Office 365, we cannot really touch the customer data without your permission if you are a customer lockbox customer.
Okay. Now, in terms of other sessions this week that might be related or you might find value in on this topic, obviously Raji earlier in this week presented on the Taming the Beast session, which dives in greater detail about how Microsoft secures their environment. It was earlier in the week, so you can catch that on recording. Also, we didn't really dive into Exchange Online Protection because it truly is worthy of its own topic, but Brian Reed presented a great session around implementing Exchange Online Protection for on-premises Exchange, which is certainly a great way to take advantage of some cloud innovation in an on-premises scenario. The anatomy of an attack happening later this week, diving into further demos and further enhancements around some of the new features coming out from 365. And as I already mentioned, Greg Taylor's modern authentication session. Now, we're going to go into some demos on some of these features we're talking about.
So how many of you really wonder what is your security profile, how secure you are? Almost all of you, right? Like, because we are always concerned about how secure we are. We have a feature called Secure Score, which scores you and tells you how secure you are compared to your other people in the industry, and it also tells you how you can improve your security profile. So we have Stu here, my colleague, who is going to show you a demo of that. And as I said, that we'll also show you Threat Finder, which will demo you and teach you how you can run phishing campaigns in your own company. Here to Stu.
And while he's getting set up, I was going to mention that we'll do Q&A after the demos, but if anyone had any specific questions around specific vendors or products, I mentioned that 365 uses load balancers, for instance, to publish Exchange. If you had specific questions about vendors used, we can do that in the Q&A. It's just hard to say that during the main sessions just because it depends on region. It can change quite a bit. But if you did have specifics about 365 infrastructure, we can certainly go over that during Q&A. All right.
There we go.
We got it up. The demo gods were kind.
Insert how many engineers joke does it take to set up PowerPoint. So what I'm going to talk about, first of all, my name is Clark. I'm a PM. I work with Raji and the security within Outlook. We spend a lot of time doing customer-facing features as well as infrastructure features. I'm going to show you a couple of things this afternoon. First thing is going to be Secure Score, which is basically all about coming up with a risk analytics profile for your organization and helping you develop a roadmap of all the controls that you can either turn on or turn off your particular subscription. A lot of the customer feedback initially with the cloud is like, we have so many security controls spread across a very diverse landscape. We're forever kind of portal hopping. Where do I go to turn these things on and off? So Secure Score was born to basically bring all of these kind of disparate security controls into one easily consumable place where you can start to turn these things on and off. Then for each individual control, we've basically stack ranked them and given them a score, and the best way to kind of get this in your mind is think of the Secure Score as a credit score for your security configurations that you have with your O365 tenant. So we give you the option here to kind of determine what kind of security posture you would like, aggressive, balanced, passive, and we will give you a recommended list of security actions you can then enable within your tenant. And these range from a mix of turning physical controls on or off, reviewing reports, enabling certain configurations that go to kind of enhance your overall security posture. Now, the reasoning behind this, any discussion around security with Office 365 is about partnership. Microsoft give you a very secure product by default out of the box. But our data is showing us nowadays that the focus of bad actors is the tenant. It is very rare now that we see attacks against Microsoft infrastructure. We see the attacks against the tenant, which tends to be the kind of weakest point in the chain now. And in order to kind of help protect the tenants themselves need to be invested in their security posture. Hence tools like this to kind of help you make those changes. So the tool will take you through various considerations, recommendations. We give you a nice kind of analyzer page where you can kind of track your progress over time to kind of see how you're tracking. We're also going to be introducing some things here to view your industry comparison. So I'm a pharmaceutical. How is my average secure score against other pharmaceuticals? I'm in financials. How do I stack up against the other big banks that are out there? Again, to kind of give you that tailored experience itself. So it's an incredibly effective tool. We've had an interesting data point that we released in we've had a few sessions on Secure Score earlier this week. Secure Score users of the service have more than double the average Secure Score of non-users of this. And we're seeing like a huge uptick in effective security controls being turned on by Secure Score users. So kind of we really encourage its use at the moment in terms of leveraging all you can. The next thing I want to show you, which kind of Raji touched on, is basically At Microsoft, we're big fans of penetration testing. We do it to ourselves a lot. A few reasons behind this. We want to test our own responses about how we act, how we react when we do come under a sustained attack. And it helps us improve our kind of engineering solutions behind it. So we run at least 2 to 3 annual exercises where we have a red team and a blue team, and they go for it. They absolutely go for it. We've just kind of finished one of these recent exercises. And as Raji alluded to, phishing is incredibly popular as an attack vector. It's cheap, it's easy, and it's crazy effective. One of the things we've been talking about recently is we know we do this a lot at Microsoft. We recommend that customers do penetration and testing themselves. How can we make this easier within the tenants themselves? Now, you can go and download any number of the PowerShell GitHub scripts, such as Go Fish today, and do this yourself. There's nothing stopping anyone kind of running these type of tests today. But how about if we packaged it up and kind of gave it to you as effectively like a red team in a box? Is the way we started thinking about it. And that's where Attack Simulator from Threat Finder was born. So we're going to be releasing this in January 2018, and basically it's going to give you the ability to run penetration tests against your own organization in a benign manner, naturally. We don't want to kind of bring things around your ears. So we're starting off with 3 attacks. First one is going to be spear phishing. We're going to brute force attack in there, and we're going to have a password spray attack in there. Ultimately, there's going to be 12 attack scenarios that we're delivering as part of this solution. But we're starting with like the most common threats that we see. And this is like one of the beauty of this. The attacks we're going to put in here are going to be the attacks that we see happen against tenants all the time in the real world. So we're just not going to kind of arbitrarily pick them. I mean, do you know the difference between kind of brute force and a password spray? Kind of brute force is a bit yesterday's news nowadays because a lot of tripwires exist in terms of account lockouts to do them. The kind of new hotness in the password world is spraying, which is where you take one password or 2 and you typically cast a wide net across tens of thousands of user accounts. It doesn't trip password blockouts. And so it's incredibly effective, it's incredibly cheap, and it is happening all the time. We see this constantly against the service. So how do we test it? You would be amazed. We do this against Microsoft, and even with MFA technology, and we embrace it fully, you've still got that weak password in there that they still exist in an organization, and it just takes one. It takes one person to kind of get compromised, and then the lateral movement becomes much easier from that point on. So enough kind of chatting, so I will chat for hours. What I'm going to kind of quickly do is just kind of give you a demonstration of what a spear phishing attack will look like in this tool. So basically, we kind of give you the option. We start off with scheduling attack, and we have this concept of campaigns. So we'll kind of create our phish campaign, whatever you want to call it. We use this for tracking, so every attack is called a campaign, and we kind of track the responses and the success that we have with each campaign as it rolls through. Next, we want to target who we're going for. So we give you the option. By default, it uses the gal picker, and we kind of show you users within your existing tenant. So you can kind of pick your victims, you can pick groups, you can pick individuals, you can kind of go crazy on here. Before we get the question, it won't work for on-premises. This is a cloud-only mailbox because the way we deliver the message is by direct injection into the mailbox. We don't use transport in any way, shape, or form. There's a reason for that. We don't want to trigger things like ATP. This is not a test of technology. It's not a test of EOP. It's not a test of ATP. It's a test of that person behind the keyboard at the other end. So we kind of do direct injection of that mail. We pick our victim, and this guy here. Now we compose the email. So we kind of have whatever we want in here. It lets you kind of have incredibly realistic. The from address is important. You can simulate an external phishing campaign, or you can simulate internal. Now, if you use an email address in here that exists within your tenant on a mailbox or an object, it will resolve that in the client. So it will, for all intents and purposes, look like it's come from within the organization, as opposed to an external one, obviously, where it will be, basically will show you within the Outlook client the kind of the URL, the SMTP namespace where it comes in. So you have the option to pick behind the two. It's worth noting that internal phishing campaigns are becoming more and more popular. It's very hard to get away with an external phishing campaign nowadays because of the way the clients do render the sender's address in the client. Internal ones, different story completely. This is how we're so successful with them at Microsoft. We will kind of target individuals and then use that compromised mailbox to launch further phishing campaigns to kind of get this daisy. So we can kind of pick in here who we want. So I have a known email address, which I'm just going to pop in there so you can see how this thing resolves. From payroll services, the login server URL. So this is going to be a credential harvest attack that I'm going to show you. So what this campaign does, it clones the O365 logon page and basically captures inputs from that page. We're going to give you the ability to specify what you want the URL to look like when it arrives in the inbox. So again, attackers are not afraid to spend money. They will go and register namespaces on the internet to make things look realistic. They'll go and buy Microsoft.com and they'll use a 0 instead of an O. They will do these kind of things. So we're going to kind of give you the ability to have these pre-registered, authentic-looking namespaces that you can use for the attacks. Then we just have whatever subject we want. Excuse my spelling, I cannot see up here. Now we have the email body. So this is just HTML. When the tool ships in January, this will be a native HTML editor within the tool itself. But it's literally just HTML markup. So for our intents and purposes here, we have a phishing mail that you'll see when it's delivered looks pretty kind of slick when it's delivered. The important things to call out is we use certain parameters in here, such as username. So if you've selected multiple targets, it will basically, the email will appear as if it's come to you personally. It will be kind of a very tailored message that looks like it's, hey, oh, this is just for me. Now this particular one, we've used this at Microsoft ourselves when we've done various kind of penetration testings, and it's basically this, the email is going to say, please update your payroll details. If you don't, you won't get paid. So a phishing attack usually has a lure of some kind, and a lure can either be a threat of something, you won't get paid, your access is going to be revoked, or a kind of more optimistic, hey, you've won something, click here to have goodness. So there's typically that kind of pattern. We hit next. We send the email, off it goes. Now, what does the client get with this? Absolutely nothing. See, how good is that? No, there we go. I'm just too impatient. So this particular email, so this is the phishing attack that we just sent. Looks legit. I'll click it. It resolves as if it's come from payroll services within my organization. So half the issue with a phishing attack is getting that trust. Do I trust who this has come from? If I'm using an internal account and it's called payroll services, sign me up. I'm clicking. And people will. And then we just literally have this link here where you can kind of go off, you click the link, and we just take them to a logon page. Now hopefully, end users look at the URL, they look at is there a cert, they kind of see, wait, copyright 2013, should I be going here? They'll still go and enter in their credentials. So we kind of, the user does the business, types in their password, then we just drop them onto a landing page. Now, by the time we ship, this will be a bit more professional. If I had my way, this is where we would have like some kind of auto taser to apply to users. But we're just going to, and we're also going to, we're talking about giving the customers the potential to kind of edit and have their own custom landing page for this, because a lot of customers already have IT training around phishing and security and best practices. So we're thinking about kind of editing that out and allowing you to have a custom landing page that you can kind of use for your end users. And so it then kind of takes us back, if we now kind of look back in the tool itself, the key thing for this is basically, how do we apply actions to this? We want to be able to take a positive action. We don't, so much IT security is around placing fear in the end user, which doesn't work. It just doesn't work as a way to mitigate this. So we want to kind of come up with discrete actions. And so when we look at the individual reports, it will show us that the name of the user, who was the victim, and what they did. Did they click on the link? did they supply the credentials? Because you can have two kinds. You can have the person who clicks on the link, yeah, it's bad, it's not the end of the world, but then you've got the person who went full in, clicked on the link, then entered their credentials. So what we're going to be doing is tying actions to each of these type of activities. So we're going to have the ability to do things like send that user an educational email, reset their password. How about we enable MFA for this person? So we're going to kind of link this back into Secure Score, which I talked about earlier, where we kind of give you these recommendations of things to turn on and off. Okay, so that's all I've really got time for. I hope that was useful. So this will be coming this January, and thank you.
And now Brandon's going to give us a different demo here. Oops, excuse me. Here.
This demo is going to show you a kind of attacks that can happen in your tenancy. There is a sniper attack that he's going to show, and if he has time, I think he'll go into the ruler attack. Let's see. We have only 7 minutes.
Yeah, it's not much. It's good. It's all good though. We'll get through the key pieces of this.
But Brandon has a session tomorrow in detail, so if you're really interested and if he doesn't get to it end to end, you can go to his session tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
His
session was one of the ones listed in the other sessions in the deck. If you're curious,
Yeah.
What was
Anatomy of an attack, and basically we'll go through a bunch of kill chain procedures or techniques that attackers very typically use, and how you can defend yourself from them. So just very quickly, I wanted to give you guys a sense of where attackers are when it comes to attacking Exchange right now. So this is a script. I ran this just at the beginning of the session, and it really highlights a common pattern that we see in the cloud and against on-prem installations of Exchange. And so what this is, I call it Mail Sniper Pwnage. It's a little PowerShell script that I whipped up that leverages a publicly available toolkit called Mail Sniper. And what Mail Sniper does is implement a series of PowerShell commandlets that leverages vulnerabilities in EWS. It's a kind of a legacy mail protocol. Most people have it enabled on their Exchange setups because it's, legacy clients will very commonly need to use them. So EWS is typically used by clients that need basic auth, and so it's very often you'll see EWS protocol interactions rely on basic auth. So there's no modern auth, and often when you're using basic auth, modern auth technologies like usable MFA and the like are not there. And so attackers leverage this kind of legacy protocol thing to perform an attack. So in this particular script, you import the module that contains this very handy single script of library commandlets. There is a way, by the way, this whole thing is being run on a VM in Azure. And so you can do it in AWS or pretty much anywhere you want in the world. I don't have to be inside your boundary in order to perform this set of attacks. I also don't need to know anything about you. This Mail Sniper thing will leverages some timing attacks in OA that can determine whether some target is in Office 365 or not, just based on how it responds to auto-discover queries. I won't actually go through that. It's much less reliable just because it's a timing attack, but that is a part of this. Essentially what I've done here is taken a set of guest usernames. I don't actually know who is in this particular tenancy, and I don't know what passwords they have. So I downloaded a password list off of the internet, and I downloaded a list of users like John F. and whatever, and put them in some text files, and you invoke this password spray EWS method. And what that does is it connects to EWS and attempts to log on and gives you a nice little local file if it guesses a password. There are a ton of passwords that are super common that meet complexity requirements. So things like fall 2017. Every single one of your companies, there's a user right now that has a password of fall 2017. That is a capital F and maybe an exclamation point at the end or whatever. That is in password spray lists. I guarantee it, and it means that's a breached account. So if I do this test, and in this particular case, I happen to know the user password, so it's not super authentic, but I get one user's account out of, let's say you have a tenancy of 20,000 or something like that. With that one user's account, I can now connect to their mailbox and download the global list. So now I have a full list of everybody in your entire tenancy. Guess what? I'm not guessing your users anymore. I'm password spraying your for reals users with the same set of passwords that I had before, right? So once I have that, I can also, by the way, I don't actually repeat that, but here's the global address list thing. And what this script will do is put it in a nice password file, global address list, which I can then just feed right into my password spray attack. So I'm chaining these password sprays. I get a toehold, then I turn around and re-execute. Next thing I want to do is get administrative privilege. And so once I have any user account, I can also dump roles from Azure Active Directory. So there's a couple little lines of PowerShell code here to do that. And basically I say I want to see anyone in the company that is a company administrator or an Exchange service administrator. If I have either of those, then I can use those account credentials to further entrench myself and exfiltrate data, which is in the end my actual goal here. So once I have the administrative users, that's down here, hang on, there's a lot of folks in the gal, scrolling. Once I have the administrative credentials, and that gets dumped out as admin users. And so you can see here the text file contains a full object model dump. I get their names, I get their full UPNs, and a bunch of other stuff. I can then, of course, go on the internet and spelunk more about them to figure out if somebody's more vulnerable than another. So once I have that, I can now perform a global content search. This is far and away the scariest bit of this. For a single user to remotely search all of your mailboxes for an arbitrary set of terms, like password, like payroll, like invoices, something like that, and to be able to do that with a single line of code is disconcerting, to say the least. So that's essentially what happens here. I set up a set of search terms that I'm looking for. This can be star or star.star, perfectly, it recognizes any kind of wildcards here. I look for passwords and creds and credentials and things like that. I guarantee somebody in your company has a password to somebody else, especially amongst your IT organizations. We see it very, very commonly. Once I have that, I invoke this global mail search with that administrative account that I had breached earlier. And what it uses is something called impersonation. So impersonation is a RBAC role that's been native in Exchange forever. It's very often used for like BlackBerry enterprise servers. Does anybody here run Bez? Couple of nerds in the audience, okay. So it's not meant to be used by users, but essentially what it does is it says this application is granted full permissions to everything inside the tenancy. There's no delegates, there's no folder permissions. It's essentially able to act as if it's that person with no other privilege, one shot. So you should definitely monitor application impersonation. In this particular scenario, it grants a single account application impersonation privileges, assigns it, and then connects to each mailbox over EWS, performs the search, and then dumps all the contents, the returns of that global search, to a local text file, which is this content thing here, searched matches. And so what you do is you get a sender received by subject body, and it just puts it in a nice CSV. The script actually will allow you to pass parameters to download attachments and put those in separate folders and the like. When it's done, removes the impersonation privileges, and there you go. So if you want to know how to protect yourself from this attack, come to my talk tomorrow at noon. It'll be great.
Right.
Okay, we're out of time, right?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Brandon. Now, we're officially out of time. However, if anyone has any questions, you can feel free to bring them up here to the front. But otherwise, thank you all for attending, and have a great rest of y'all's conference.